Good morning. Thanks for joining us. My name is Laura Hennighausen, and I am the Director of Foundation Relations with Purpose Possible. We are an Atlanta-based firm that specializes in fundraising and creating meaningful connections between organizations and their community. And today I'm going to be speaking on trends in foundation funding. This is a big topic. I know we've all gone through a really crazy past year. There's a lot of changes, a lot of uncertainty for all of us with our fundraising. And as the Director of Foundation Relations, it's kind of my job on behalf of Purpose Possible to keep my thumb on the trends of what's going on in the funding world, specifically with private foundations and corporate foundations. So thank you for joining us today. We are going to get right into it with our slides here. We are a firm that works in fundraising with tons of different clients. We have dozens of clients in Atlanta and then also in Baltimore, DC, the Bay Area, and in Florida. We are proud to work with all sorts of different organizations, and we have tons of experience with a bunch of different consultants in all sorts of areas. So if you ever need help with fundraising, with strategic planning, with program planning, anything like that, you know where to find us. We will share our contact information at the end of the presentation. And you can see by visiting our website a selection of our clients. We have all sorts of different clients that we've worked with on and off. And we really do serve as your outsourced fundraising department. So if you need help in any area, just for a project base, something like that, or if you need longer term support on a retainer basis, we are your group. Today, we're going to talk about, again, trends in funding. 2020 really was a huge year for foundations. Obviously, it was a huge year for all of us with a lot of different reasons. Foundations really are not immune to everything that has been happening to all of us. So as we have been trying to acclimate to the new normal, to pivoting our programming, to understanding how we are best serving our communities, foundations are joining us in that. And we need to work harder, I think, to kind of bridge the gap and work together. So I hope that that is some of the information I'm going to be able to share today to kind of break down some of these barriers. I'm going to start off by referring to a study that was done recently by Candid and the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. You can find this on their website. The Center for Disaster Philanthropy covers all sorts of natural disasters, and they've been doing a lot of research into how COVID has specifically impacted funding. And they cover things like, individual funding, major gifts, corporate funding, the whole shebang. From the study, I've pulled out some information that's specifically about foundation funding. And this is, again, national. However, the issues we're going to talk about today are also really relevant to organizations in the Metro Atlanta area and in Georgia, particularly. So in 2020, more than $20 billion were awarded for COVID-19 globally. Remember when you review numbers on studies like this, that they often do include pledges and other money that has not yet been committed, but at least $20 billion was awarded or committed in 2020 for COVID-19. Another thing to keep in mind when you review things like this is $4 billion of that $20 billion was awarded by Mackenzie Scott, just herself. So keep that in mind when you're looking at these things. But all in all, we saw a huge surge of funding specifically toward COVID relief, either through awarding money to study vaccines or to directly support organizations, nonprofits that were affected because of the COVID pandemic. This report is really interesting. If you dig into it on their website, again, the Center for Disaster Philanthropy, independent foundations gave a good amount of money against corporate foundations. Corporate foundations, as you might notice, tend to be more on the front lines in responding to disasters and issues like this. They can mobilize their funding a little more quickly, but we did see that independent and private foundations quickly caught up. They tended to give larger donations, larger grants. And then again, as I will mention, the high net worth individuals, a lot of that funding, again, came from one person. So it does skew some of these numbers, but it is really interesting to see. Human service organizations received the largest share of funding, which is 28%. Human service organizations would include things like food banks or the YMCA, the United Way. We have to remember when you're reviewing information like this, these trend reports, that corporate organizations, not necessarily their foundations, but if a corporation is giving grant funding or giving donations, they are not necessarily required to report who they are giving money to. So there may be situations where maybe these numbers are higher, maybe they're lower. We don't know totally, but it seems pretty obvious and makes sense that human service organizations would be the leading winners of these grants in 2020, and then as we move into 2021. Funding for unrestricted or flexible support did increase. I think that's not a surprise. We saw a lot of, or we heard of organizations, foundations awarding general operating grants, making grants that they already had more flexible, removing deadlines, things like that. Unrestricted funding increased by 21%, but that also includes some of these individual high net worth donors. So foundations themselves, that increased their funding for general operating and unrestricted support during COVID increased by 9% overall. There was a 2020 survey by the Center for Effective Philanthropy that said about 75% of foundations were considering loosening their restrictions, loosening application procedures, reporting procedures. And we saw that happen in Atlanta. We also saw pretty public discussions of how applications are handled, how organizations are vetted, how long it takes to get grant funding. That is something that I am eager to see if that continues into 2021. And we'll get into a little bit more specifically about foundations in Atlanta in a moment. Then we get to 13% of institutional funding was designated to BIPOC communities. This would include BIPOC-led organizations or organizations that are committed to directly serving BIPOC communities. Still not a lot, and that was only an increase, but it was an increase from only 5%. So we are seeing that as a trend. I think that will continue. That is something that we will continue to see. And we do want to also keep in mind that although, so this is 5% or an increase from 5% of organizations directly committing to funding BIPOC communities, that does not mean there are many more that are prioritizing BIPOC-led organizations and BIPOC-led communities, but just not necessarily restricted. So that's something that we will see as we move forward, and that is something we've heard in conversations in Atlanta, obviously. So my role, again, with Purpose Possible is I am one of our consultants. So I work a lot hands-on with some of our clients, but I'm also the director of foundation relations, which means that I am serving as a liaison between our firm and foundations out in the Metro Atlanta area primarily. This has provided me the opportunity to have really interesting one-on-one conversations with a lot of funders in Atlanta. And it's something that I've really enjoyed the opportunity to use my privilege of position right now, not representing necessarily any one nonprofit, but speaking as a consultant. I am having the opportunity to have really honest one-on-one conversations with a lot of funders, something that I was never able to do as a development director or a development coordinator when I was working for a specific nonprofit. So this has been really eye-opening. It's something that we have been doing regularly, and I share the information that I learn with our team so that our consultants are aware of any funding trends, anything coming up, deadlines, changes, things like that. And that is where some of this information that I'm going to go over in a moment here comes from. The foundations that I've been speaking to most regularly are the ones you can see listed on your screen. So we have a pretty wide variety of local, well-known foundations. Some of them, like the Courts Foundation or the Campbell Foundation, are very large capital funders. Then we have organizations like all of the Wells Fargo and SunTrust, Truist, Trustee foundations, managed foundations. So there's kind of a wide variety of how these organizations are managed. The one thing with all of these is that obviously they have someone that I was able to talk to. So they have staff, they have boards, obviously, that are accessible and willing to have conversations, happy to have conversations with potential funders. And that goes with SunTrust and Wells Fargo. I know sometimes they are a bit of a mystery about how to actually get a hold of somebody to speak to over there. But they have staff that are very friendly, very happy, and happy to help with anybody asking about a specific managed foundation, of which there are many over there, obviously. I also took the opportunity, so I've had individual conversations with all of these foundations to learn about what your process, what is your process? What does your board look like? How do you select who's on your board? How do you determine who you are awarding grants to? And I've been getting into the nitty gritty. I also took the opportunity, some of you have submitted questions ahead of time, and I compiled those questions and then sent them to these foundation contacts to get their direct feedback. So we're going to get into some of their answers here. And I will be taking questions, so definitely put those in the chat, and then at the end of this, we'll cover any questions that I haven't already answered in this information. So, did 2020 affect funding priorities moving forward? That is something that we're all wondering. And in general, it seems that yes, but I think it is clearly foundation specific about how much they've affected them. I would say that generally, it seems from my conversations that larger established capital funders are probably going to change their focus areas less, and they are going to change their application procedures less. I am seeing more of a change with the smaller, younger foundations, or the ones that have already pretty easy application procedures. They seem to be the foundations that we might see even further reducing those barriers to applying. But when you're getting into very, very large donations for capital support, that will still remain pretty formal. These are some of the answers that we got back to this specific question when I asked them. The top two things that people were really obviously impacted by, no surprise, would be the social justice conversations happening over the past year. And I did ask each of these foundations specifically, what have you been doing? How has this affected your grant making? And how are you responding internally? I heard a variety of answers. I will say that we have heard several foundations, and again, more of the smaller foundations, have taken the opportunity to do deep dives, to analyze who they fund, to look at their boards, to look at their funding priorities and practices, and see where they might be, participating in the inequity in our industry, with whether or not they mean to. But some of them are really taking this opportunity to make some changes here. COVID definitely affected them. And I would say that when I talk about COVID affecting these foundations, it's not necessarily on their bottom line, but I think that it made them take a moment to look more at who they fund and how they can better support organizations like ours on the long term. So this is a quote from one of the foundation leaders: "A deepened understanding of racial injustice and equity will lead to evolving work with those issues in mind." I think that is right on the nose. I think that's what needs to happen, clearly. And I've been really encouraged hearing this from our foundation leaders. Then we asked, did 2020 affect your foundation in any other way? We did see, again, some organizations were revising their procedures or application procedures to make them less onerous. I think that we will continue to see that, but I don't think that we should count on it necessarily, that all foundations are going to completely remove those barriers again. Again, the smaller foundations that already seem to have pretty easy application procedures are the ones that are really seeming to take this to heart. There has been conversation. I was really pleasantly surprised to hear some of these foundation leaders bring up the idea of the common grant application. And I think that's something that we should encourage. Everybody knows Community Foundation has a very robust application. So maybe we could take something like that and share it amongst Metro Atlanta foundations to use that same information, since we're already doing it. A lot of you asked, how is the best way to reach out to a foundation that you don't have a relationship with? Again, the foundations that I am directly speaking about today, almost all of them have staff, or they have someone that acts as, the main point of contact for the organization. We all know not all foundations are like that. So this is for these foundations, like the ones listed, that have staff, that have people, they have a website, they are more accessible. And everybody we talked to said that they would like us to email and call them before submitting an LOI. That is general rule of thumb. I encourage all of my clients to do that anyway. I do not submit an LOI if it's a local funder without trying to reach out and have a conversation first. You can always get so much more information across by having a conversation, by showing them, having a site visit, sending them information, adding them to your mailing list, things like that, to get them to really get to know your organization more than they might understand from just reading an LOI. So don't be afraid to contact them. If they have a website, if their organization contact information is listed, use it, get in touch. With that in mind, obviously make sure that they are already funding organizations similar to yours. So you're not completely going off the deep end there. But I think that by and large, everybody I've spoken to is really accessible and happy to have a conversation with you, even if it's just for advice. If you're not sure that they're a good fit, still reach out to them and ask to have a conversation about, if it's not your foundation, then who would you recommend that I speak to? Who might you be able to introduce me to? We have to remember that these foundations are here to support our work, to support the community, and they want to do what they can to help us. This was a really good reminder that one of the foundations submitted back when we asked them your specific questions that you submitted early. And this is something that I try to remind my clients very often. It is so important to know your strategic vision. We see, especially in cases in the past year, when there are new funding opportunities or all of a sudden there are emergency opportunities, foundations are all of a sudden putting out calls for work in the DEI space, and they want to support BIPOC communities where they've never done it before. And it feels like there is maybe sometimes a panic to find a program that you can use to apply for that grant funding. We need to really focus on making sure that our work in the nonprofit community really is genuine in these spaces. And foundations are paying attention. They know, and a couple brought up the fact that they are wary of nonprofits coming with a brand new program that has this DEI focus, and they're all into we're going to go into these BIPOC communities and do this work now, where that wasn't originally part of their vision. They see that, and we need to know they see that. I'm glad they see that. They should see that. But we need to be really genuine. So if you are, let's say, an arts organization, and you feel like all of this has been happening around you. All of these funding dollars are going out and you're not eligible for any of them, or you don't know where you can be eligible for them. So it feels like, okay, maybe we need to consider what we can do to better serve the disadvantaged communities around us. This is the fantastic opportunity for you to reach out and work with another organization already embedded in those communities. And you need to go to that organization with an offer of partnership or program planning, but really come and think about what you can offer that other organization. This is not the time to go to them and ask them to plug into their community and put your program, just drop it in the middle of a place that you've never been before. The past year has been an opportunity for us all to really think hard about how we work and how we can work together with these foundations to make sure these changes and improvements in many ways over the past year continue as we move forward into the next year. Here are a bunch of other quotes that we got when I asked it for just general tips and tricks and advice from foundations for all of us as we're asking for information. Again, they, always do your research ahead of time. Like I said, I always encourage our clients, and me personally, I will reach out to a foundation before we submit an LOI. But before I even reach out to the organization, I will look and see, okay, who have they funded recently? What have they funded? How much are they funding? And see if I can find a connection from a board member. Maybe my client, maybe my nonprofit has a board member that knows someone on that board or has worked with an organization that was previously funded. That is an easy way to start a conversation. We want to work to build relationships with foundation staff. I would also highly, highly recommend that you start building these relationships well in advance of grant funding deadlines. Foundation, everybody that I've talked to, honestly, has been so lovely. I think that there are so many opportunities for us to really build actual meaningful relationships and break down the barriers between foundations and nonprofits. There's a weird hierarchical kind of power structure that we need to work around right now and build real lasting relationships, because that's the only way that we are going to be able to affect and improve maybe funding practices moving forward. If we want to see foundations use a common grant application, for example, they need to hear from nonprofits that this is a good idea and why it's a good idea. We need to work together to identify these places where we can do better in the community together. Obviously they're saying don't miss a deadline, but if you do, or if something's happening, things happen to all of us. We have personal emergencies, or there's an emergency with the organization, or there's a huge event that pops up that we weren't anticipating. Just reach out to your foundation contacts and let them know, hey, we'd like to submit this, or I have a report coming up, but it might be a little late. They're more than willing to work with you to figure that out. And I don't think you should be nervous to have that conversation with them. Generally, though, it is that foundation staff are people just like us, and they want to have a good relationship with their grantees. So make that effort. Try and share your information with them, put them on your email newsletter, send them your annual report, and just keep them updated on what you're working on. Moving forward, so the foundations that I have been speaking to in the Metro Atlanta area, we asked them, are you going to continue focus on COVID relief, or are you going to return to business as usual? You can see it's pretty split. We heard direct quotes from some foundations saying, okay, everybody's been affected by COVID, so we consider everything COVID funding at this point, whether it's your normal programming or not. We are trying to make sure that you can continue operating. I think that, obviously this is going to be a case-by-case basis. It's going to change as the year goes on and we see how COVID continues to develop and hopefully go away. Most organizations, though, did say, I think almost all of them, only a few, obviously, from the slide, said that they were still only focusing on former grantees. We did see a lot of foundations kind of close ranks. over the past year, which was frustrating to a lot of young and newer nonprofits that don't already have a huge funding base. But really, that was Foundation's effort to make sure that they could continue to support the organizations they had already established relationships with. Again, relationships are so important. You want to be on a first name basis with your foundation friends to make sure they think of you when things happen like this. But yes, we will see the majority of organizations open back up and be willing to consider new applicants. I think there's also, we have to remember, so many people needed funding last year. I know Imlay Foundation told me that in September they had more than double the applications they usually have during that funding period. And just from a scale of how to even manage that many applications, some of them had to look back and say, okay, we're going to focus on the people that we already know. And then this again is a quote from a very large foundation in Atlanta. Don't be afraid to let us know that you aren't perfect. We aren't either. Let us know how we can help. Just keep that in mind. I think that, honesty is the best policy. They want to know how they can help. So we need to be honest with those. That is generally kind of what I went through with those conversations. I think, I'm happy to take direct questions if anybody has anything. And I hope that this was helpful. Okay, let's see. If an application is rejected, but your organization is asked to reapply, what should the organization do in the meantime to prepare for the next application and stay connected with the foundation? That's a great question. Thank you. I would just keep open the method of or communication that you already have. So let's say you applied last year, right in the beginning of COVID, when we still thought things might be fairly normal. And then you got a response saying, sorry, we are only going to be funding our current grantees right now. And it's now a year later. In the meantime, I would hope that you would have kept them updated on what your programming pivots are, what you're focusing on. Just keep them updated. It's like any major donor. You want to keep them updated about your programming. You want them to be aware of the struggles that you're having, of places where you need funding and why you need that funding. You want to make sure that you're making those compelling stories heard. But yes, make sure, put them on your mailing list, put them on your e-newsletter list, all of that sort of thing. Just keep them way over-informed almost, and they'd be happy to keep in touch. And then that way you can decide what needs to happen when you apply the next time around, whether you need to submit even a full application. Some of these foundations, if you're keeping in touch with them, you're not going to need to submit a whole full-blown application. They might say, okay, great. We've been talking to you for the past year. Like, let's move to the next round. Okay. Our foundation speaking to the level of accessibility needed in order to have applications reviewed, particularly as they are looking at equity issues around funding. Okay, who don't have a direct relationship. Just because you don't have a direct relationship right now doesn't mean you can't create one. And that, again, is what I'm encouraging. I think that you want to create that opportunity to have a conversation with these foundations, these funders. As far as accessibility, unfortunately, I do not see many organizations, many foundations saying that they're going to completely open up their application process. The reasons I have heard are because they have limited staff. They feel that they can only review so many applications at a time. I know that's frustrating to hear, especially when you know that they have money. But I know, for example, Tom Asher at the Rich Foundation said to me that any money that they don't spend on themselves goes back directly into the community. So that's why a lot of them don't have a lot of staff, unfortunately, and they have to really limit what they can handle for reviewing, especially if it's an organization or a foundation that doesn't have any full-time staff. It's just really somebody coming in to manage their board meetings once every couple months. I wish we could see more accessibility and more open application processes, but unfortunately, I've not heard a ton of that in general. Let's see. We've had the opportunity to partner with several other nonprofits on applications. Where these collaborations are becoming more and more important to funders. Do you see that going forward? Absolutely. Yes. Foundations like to see partnerships. And when I was working just as a development director, sometimes I found that frustrating because we have this great program. We need the funding for it. Why do we need to create these extra steps? I think that is a conversation that needs to happen in the funding community as well, because partnerships aren't always helpful or natural. But if you have a program where it really makes sense to have a partner, say you want to reach another community in a very genuine way, you want to expand something that you can't do on your own, funders love to see that. They want to see us sharing our resources. I think their worry is that organizations, especially small nonprofits, and new nonprofits that are coming into a industry where already there exists an organization doing that same work. They're just concerned about duplicating any services and work that way. And they don't want to split their funding. If they could give a bigger grant to an organization that's there doing that work really well, they don't want to split it between a bunch of smaller organizations, for better or for worse. So I think, yes, we are definitely going to see a continued interest in partnership. But again, we want to make sure those partnerships are actually genuine. They make sense. And if it's going to cause you a lot of time and trouble to make the partnership work, then don't. You need to do what's right for your organization and have that honest conversation with the foundation. If they are encouraging you to partner on something that doesn't make sense, tell them. They need to learn that as well. Okay, I think we're going to get one more question maybe here. Okay, compared to the big foundations like Woodruff, are the odds higher that smaller and mid-sized nonprofits will get accepted for funding by smaller family foundations? Yeah, I would say so. And I don't know. I don't know that that's a hard and general rule, but it seems generally smaller foundations, family foundations, where the family is still actively involved in the decision-making about where their funding is going. They are more nimble generally. Again, this is not law, but this is in my observations with these conversations I've had. They are more nimble. They are more able and interested to be in the community and learn about what's happening around them. And so often, yes, they do take a stronger or a harder look at smaller and mid-sized foundation or nonprofits. And that's also because, a large organization like Woodruff is giving a huge grant level, right? They're going to give $100,000, $500,000, $1 million. And if your budget is only $200,000, they're not going to be comfortable or want to give you a grant that size. And I know all of this is kind of frustrating to hear, but it's the truth and that's how it works. So I think, yes, you have a better chance most of the time working with a smaller foundation, reaching out to these family foundations that have people out in the community and are going to be more aware of what you're doing and really understand how it's affecting change where you live. All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, we are available, Purpose Possible. You can visit our website, purposepossible.com. Feel free to email me. I think we're going to throw my email maybe up on the screen. I'm sorry I don't have a shorter last name. We can drop that in the chat maybe as well. But it's just lhennighausen@purposepossible.com. And again, we are here. If you have questions, you just need advice, you're frustrated by something. I also, please share with us if you have concerns about an application process, if you're frustrated or confused about something, and if there's something that you would like to pass on to a foundation, but maybe not necessarily have it come from you, I'm happy to be that person for you. I can have these conversations, and that's what I'm hoping that we can start to do. And please make sure you're on our mailing list. One thing that I am hoping to introduce in the next couple months here is that we have some more informal conversations on StreamYard like this, but where it'll be me and one foundation person. So the head of, XYZ Foundation, and we can just ask them all the questions that we're all dying to know and understand about how they operate and how to really get in front of them and get them to give you money. So thank you again. It's been really fun, and I will hopefully talk to y'all soon.